Hi, welcome to this video covering what's new in IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.10, IBM Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.6, and IBM Spectrum Copy Data Management. My name is Trisha Jiang, and I'll be covering the what's new in the Spectrum Protect family, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to cover what's new in Spectrum Protect Plus and Spectrum Copy Data Management. Now, these all will announce on June 9th, and they will GA on June 12th. The first new feature in Spectrum Protect is going to be the ability to copy retention sets out to tape. Back in version 8.1.7, we introduced retention sets, and in version 8.1.9, we introduced the ability to place a hold on retention sets. Now, what a retention set does is it takes data that's already been backed up, and based upon a retention rule, it will create either a weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly point-in-time snapshot of those backups that will then be retained for a specific amount of time, maybe a month, a year, multiple years. And now we can take those point-in-time snapshots, which were previously created in place, meaning they were created wherever the backups are currently residing, and we can copy those out to tape. When we do this, we do have a dedicated tape or tapes for the retention data so that this is separate from your daily operational backups. And of course, that's going to help when it comes to restores. Also, all of the related activity log messages about these retention sets will be kept for the life of those retention sets. And this is critical if you have an audit or need to understand the history of the creation of those retention sets. With the introduction of retention sets to tape, we've introduced the concept of a retention storage rule and a retention storage pool. So we take our existing retention rules, and now you have the option of creating a retention storage pool. And this is where your retention sets would be stored on tape. And when you create this retention storage pool, it will automatically generate a retention storage rule to actually do the copy out to tape. We do support things like co-location on these tapes, and we also have a concept of stacking where you might only want one retention set on a tape, or you might say, no, let's go ahead and put multiple retention sets on tapes. And this is really going to be based upon if you want to actually take those tapes out of the library after the retention set is created, or if you don't mind keeping them in the library for a little bit longer. If your retention sets are being created on a weekly basis, then you could stack next week's retention set on the same tape or tapes. When we create these retention sets to tapes, if the data has been deduped, compressed, or encrypted, we will rehydrate it on the fly as we copy it out to the tape. So all the data on the tape is undeduped, unencrypted, uncompressed. Of course, if your tape drive does support things like encryption or compression, you can utilize the tape technology's capability to do that. Now, when we make the copy out to tape, the original backup remains in its storage pool until that backup expires off. And after that backup expires off, then the only residing copy of that would be out on the retention set, which in this case would be on tape. We don't have the ability to create copies of retention sets, but you could create multiple retention sets with the same content if you did need to send copies to multiple locations. When it comes to restore, we will first check to see if the version still exists in its original location, but if that has expired off, then we will mount the tape and restore from that tape. We've also introduced a new capability to manage the retention tapes movements between when they're in the library, when they're checked out, and so forth. So we will talk more about how through the Operations Center you can now manage these off-site retention tapes. And then finally, I'll also show you our new custom reports for the retention information. I do have a demo of creating retention sets to tape, so you can check that out here at this YouTube link. This is a good visual of the relationship between the retention sets and the retention rules and the retention storage rules. Notice that in the blue is the piece that was delivered in 8.1.7, which was creating retention sets in place. And the green shows the new piece where we can copy those out to tape. So first of all, you create a retention rule, and this is going to specify the nodes you want to include and how long you want to keep it. And then the new destination of retention pool if you want it to go to tape. When this retention rule runs, it creates a retention set. And this retention set is created from the backup copies from either Spectrum Protect clients or Spectrum Protect for VE clients. The retention set is in place. All it does is update our Spectrum Protect database with the information that this is now also being retained as a retention set. If there is a retention storage rule associated, when that retention storage rule runs, it picks up any of the retention sets that have not yet been copied out to tape, and it hydrates them if they were deduped or encrypted or compressed. It writes them out to tape according to the retention storage pool that is pointed to by the retention storage rule. And now we have a retention sets on tape as well as the original backups in their primary storage pool. Now, over time, the original backups will version off, and you will then only have the retention set out on tape. So this can be done either from the Operations Center or command line. For the command line, you're first going to define the retention storage pool. And the new piece here is define storage pool, pool type equals retention. Now notice the storage pool name that we created, because we're going to also automatically create a storage rule with this same name. Now you have to use a sequential dev class with a tape device class. This could be an automatic library like SCSI or in a VTL. File is not supported. And we do support LTO 3592 or eCart. This storage pool is dedicated to retention copies. And because of that, the movement between storage pools is not supported. So there's no next storage pool. You can't do migrate pool, move data, or move node data. Reclamation on this storage pool is only going to be on site because there's a good chance that the backups have already versioned off. So when you do this defined storage pool, we automatically create this storage rule with the same name, and you'll want to go in from the command line and update that storage rule with a start time when that should go and look for retention sets to copy out to tape, how long that copy process should run, and the max processes. And this max processes is the maximum number of output tape drives that should be used. So if you have a larger number, it's going to take less time to complete, but it means that you'll have more volumes used and perhaps fewer volumes that are completely filled. So now that you've created a tape retention storage pool and you've updated your storage rule, you'll now either define or update your retention rule. And this new piece in this retention rule is going to be the destination equals, and you're going to point that to your storage pool, which we called ret storage pool. You'll also want to specify stacking, yes or no, and max copy processes. The max copy processes is if you want to tune the number of processes for the specific retention rule and not just use the general max processes that we set for the storage rule. When it comes to stacking, if you set yes, then the retention sets can share volumes with the other retention sets. This works okay if you're leaving your tapes inside of the library, but if you plan on checking out those retention set volumes after they've been created, you probably want to mark stack equals no. And in this case, once the retention sets have been written out to the volumes, we will mark them as full. Colocation can also be turned on, and colocation, just like with other write-to-tape features, is either by node, file space, or group. Now, if you turn on both stacking and colocation, then the retention sets that contain multiple nodes or multiple file spaces or multiple groups will be split up and placed on their own tape. And then we will only stack on top of those tapes if stacking is set to yes. Okay, so I walked through the parameters using command line. The easiest way to do this is going to be through the Operations Center. So from the Operations Center, storage pools, if you click on this plus storage pool button and then click on retention, once you click next, you're going to be prompted for the name of that retention tape storage pool. You'll choose the Spectrum Protect server that this is for. You can give it a description. And now you're going to choose if you want to co-locate by node, group, or file space. And then you'll specify the storage rules for copying to the tape, the time that you want to start the copy at, and if you want to limit how long that can run before it's stopped. After you click next here, you'll then choose the storage pool you want to utilize. And remember, this will be LTO 3592 or an eCart. Okay, and then you'll go ahead and add that storage pool. When you added that storage pool, a retention storage rule was automatically created. But now we need to either update or create a retention rule. So we'll go ahead and create a new rule. So we click on Create Rule. The piece is here on the left-hand side. This was here ever since version 8.1.7. This is your normal create a retention set in place. We are going to give that rule a name. So you choose your server, you choose when these retention sets should be created, the start time, and how long they should be retained for. The new piece, if you want that retention set copied out to tape, you'll fill in the portion in the yellow box here. This is optional. You don't have to fill this in if you do not want retention sets copied out to tape. But in our case, we do want it copied out to tape. So we will specify a retention pool. That's the one we just created. You can choose if you want volume stacking or not. And then you can choose this tape drive limit. And here you see that default of calculate best limit that I just spoke about. And then finally, you'll choose clients, Spectrum Protect nodes, or virtual machines that you want to be part of that retention set. And then once you click create, you will have created that new retention rule. When that retention rule runs, it creates an in-place retention set. And we can see that that retention set has actually been created. Now the copy out to tape is actually sleeping, meaning the retention set is created, but we haven't copied it out to tape yet. Once we start copying that retention set out to tape, you'll see that it's copying. And once it's completed copying out to tape, it will show as completed. There are some other statuses you can see. One of these is interrupted. So if a copy out to tape was interrupted for any reason and those files were not completely copied out to tape, so here you can see that case right here. We can see that this ret rule tape was interrupted. Once you've taken care of whatever problem caused that interruption, maybe not enough tapes, or maybe the tape drive went offline, you'll need to go in and manually resume the copy out to tape. So if you right click on that and click on more and click on resume, that copy to tape will resume. Also in the Operations Center from our cup of coffee dashboard, you'll see we have a retention set pod over here, and you can see the different states: expiring, interrupted, copying, sleeping. You can actually click directly on any of these states and it'll take you to those specific retention sets in that state. And at the bottom here we have the storage rules, and we can see if there was any problem running any of those storage rules. Inside of the Operations Center, you can drill down and get details on the retention sets, the retention rules, the retention storage pools, as well as the storage rules. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of those screens. Here is our storage rule detail. The two things I want to point out here, on our graph, these are going to be the last 14 runs. But remember, we don't always run a storage rule daily. A storage rule might only run once a month or once a week. So these intervals will be the last 14 runs. You'll also see the status of those runs. And if, for instance, you clicked on a warning status, you could go and scroll on the left-hand side here under the recent history and see why that failed. In fact, then you could click through and get more information on that failure. Another thing to note is that each retention set has a set ID associated with it. And if you take a look at the details of these retention sets, you can actually go into the activity log and look at all of the activity information related to that retention set. And that retention set ID will correlate to the job ID that shows up in that activity log. And all of these activity log pieces that are associated with that specific job ID will be retained for the life of that retention set. Okay, so what I just talked about was the ability to now copy the retention sets out to tape. Once those retention sets are on tape, most likely you'll want to take those tapes off-site. And this is where retention set tape volume management comes into play. If you're familiar with disaster recovery media management, which has been inside of Spectrum Protect forever, this is similar but separate from that. And retention set tapes is actually going to be our first delivery in the Operations Center for this offsite tape management. The Operations Center admin can request that a retention set be brought back on site and checked in for restore options. And each tape volume is going to have this media status of restore only if that happens. And that way we can track that. The purpose of it being in the library is just for restore, not that we should continue writing to it. These tapes are then going to be returned to the offsite vault storage until the retention set on them expires. So here you have your Spectrum Protect Plus server. We created a retention set. At that point, it is going to be mountable. Then we can check it out of the library and it becomes not mountable. Once it's taken by the courier in transit, it's in courier status. Once it gets to the vault, we have vault status. If we have to retrieve it from the vault, we can package it up, and while it's waiting to be picked up, it's in vault retrieve. Then it's in courier retrieve, and then either an on-site retrieve if we're there for like a reclamation, versus a restore only if all we're doing is restoring retention sets off of it. So this restore only is really the new piece for the folks that are already using disaster recovery media management. The new commands we're introducing are going to be move rep media and query rep media. You can also get specific with your DRM vault name and your DRM courier name and your DRM mountable name by utilizing these set commands. I do have a demo out on YouTube, so check that out. So when we look at each of the pieces here, for those of you who have used DRM, you'll know the mountable, not mountable, courier, vault, vault retrieve, etc. And here the restore only piece is the new piece, which means it's checked into the library as read-only to enable restoration of retention set data. Setting up the retention set tape volume management is straightforward. By default, you really don't have to do anything. You can use it immediately. However, if you want to configure it a little bit more, you can do a set DRM vault name and list specifically your vault name, as well as a set DRM courier name and a set DRM not mountable name. And that way you can customize it with your company's specifics. That is a 250 character limit on each of those entries. And if you've already set up DRM, you might have already set these values in Spectrum Protect. Now from the Operations Center, you can use it to bring back the retention sets on site if you need to do a restore, and then to return those to the vault once the restore is complete. It's also useful for viewing the status and location of the retention tape volumes and which retention tape volumes, for instance, belong to which retention set. Of course, you can generate custom retention reports to help you understand the type of retention sets that are out there and for how long they're being kept and if any are about to expire. For the DRM scripts, any customers already using these DRM scripts can customize them further with these new rep media commands. The rep media commands use the same state transitions as the DR media commands. However, the rep media commands will only process the retention storage pool volumes, and your dr media commands can't be used for those retention storage pool volumes. Both of those commands will still use these db backup and db snapshot volumes, and the query DRM status and set DRM commands will apply to both the rep media and DRM media. So let's go through a scenario. So let's say that a client wants to do a restore of a retention set data, but that data is off-site. So when the client goes to do the restore, they're going to see this message ANR1422W, read access denied. Now, either that client could contact the Spectrum Protect admin and let them know about this failure, or if the admin was using the alerting system, they would see an alert pop up in the OC on this ANR1422W. And at that point, the admin can go into the operations center and drill down on that retention set for that specific client, and they can click on More and then Move Media. And what we want to move that media to is we want to select it to be on-site retrieve. This means we want to bring it back on-site to be utilized. Now, they will get a warning saying, if you bring this back on-site, you might consider putting it into a retention hold so that by the off chance that retention set does not expire in transit. And you simply click I understand. And when clicking this I understand, you're just saying I got it. It doesn't actually set a retention hold. Okay, so now the retention set is back on site and possibly maybe even put into the IO station. So now we want to move the retention set to the restore only piece. This is step 4 here. So once again, the admin will go into the operations center for this specific retention set, go into More, but this time they're going to choose Move Media and they're going to put it into the restore only state. And once it's in the restore only state, it will be checked in to the library, and the administrator can then let the client know that they can go ahead with their restore. Inside of the Spectrum Protect Operations Center, there is a custom report, and this will cover things like the retention hold activity, retention set expiration, tape retention issues, and retention media status summary. Here on the right-hand side is an example of the report that will be emailed out on the frequency that you select and to the people that you select. I do have a YouTube on setting up these reports, but basically you'll go into the Operations Center reports, you'll click on this plus report, you will choose to add a retention report, and of course you could add additional reports as well. When you click next, you'll then specify which pieces inside of the retention report you want to be included in that report email. And then when you click Save, it will go ahead and save that report. And here's an example of what gets generated. So what I just talked about was the ability to track your data retention sets as they're taken off-site and brought back on-site. I also talked about the retention set reports that are now available in the Operations Center. The next new feature is our ability to back up the Spectrum Protect metadata catalog, which is a DB2 database, out to the cloud. And this could either be an S3 or Azure cloud. The reason you back up your Spectrum Protect database is because it has all the meta information about what's backed up, where it's backed up to, passwords, how long to keep things, and schedules, and all the other critical information. Currently, you're probably either backing it up to a file server or out to a tape. Now, when we do this backup, it will utilize a DB2 native encryption by default, and we now include the device configuration files and vol.hist files, as well as the master key file, as part of the data that's sent out to the cloud. And this is important if you have a complete disaster and need to restore from the cloud. Not only can we bring back the database information, but the critical dev config, vol.hist, and master key files. Now, multiple Spectrum Protect servers can utilize the same cloud bucket to do their backups to. And when we do our backups and our restores of the Spectrum Protect metadata catalog out to the cloud, we don't use any type of cloud caching. When you go to do a restore of a Spectrum Protect DB2 database from the cloud, you can choose from the multiple Spectrum Protect servers that might have backed up to that cloud, and it will bring back the devconfig, volhist, and encryption key database. So let's go through the details on that. Obviously, you will have had to set up your S3 cloud or your Azure cloud via the cloud provider. And then inside of Spectrum Protect, you will define a connection to that cloud using this define connection, cloud type equals either S3 or Azure. And then you'll put in your cloud URL, the secret password, buckets, and so forth. You can check that connection with a query connection or a validate cloud connection command. Once you've created that connection, you're then going to define a device class with the dev type of cloud. You can then do this set DB recovery dev class, and in this case, you're going to give it a password, which is going to be your master key encryption password, as well as the number of streams and encrypt equals yes, which encrypt equals yes is set by default. This is DB2 native encryption that's happening. There's some other options out there, including compression, which by default is always going to be no, because you can't do compression and encryption together. Also, this protect keys for the cloud device class, the default is going to be yes. And for other device classes, that default is no. Also, the num streams, the default is always 1. But if you are looking for better backup and restore performance, then you'll want to set that higher. The password, you'll have to enter a value, and this is going to be required whenever you set your protect key to yes, which is the default, and it is required for your cloud device classes. A couple notes on this. You do have to have the password that was set with this set DB recovery in order to unencrypt the DB2 database. That's going to be critical. And multiple Spectrum Protect servers can use that same cloud, and we don't use a cloud cache when we're backing up or restoring the Spectrum Protect DB2 backup. Okay, when it comes to restoring, we've got a couple scenarios. The first scenario is if your volhist and devconfig and encryption files are still on your server that you need to restore your Spectrum Protect DB2 metadata catalog to, then you'll simply do this DSM serve restore DB, you'll give it the password, and then prompt equals no. This will fail if your devconfig file is not present. You'll get this type of messages. If your devconfig file is present, it'll just go through and do the restore for you. And it's reading all the cloud-based connection definitions from the devconfig file and the volume locations from the volume history files. If you had a complete disaster and not only did you lose your Spectrum Protect database, but also the volhist and devconfig files, then you'll want to specify the cloud type, the cloud URL, the cloud password, and maybe even the server name when you do this DSM serve restore. And so this will recover your devconfig, volhist, and DSM key database files from the cloud. If it by chance does find an existing DSM key devconfig or volhist file on your server, it will rename the old ones before it restores the copy from the cloud. If server equals not specified, and when we get out there it does find multiple Spectrum Protect server database backups out there, we will prompt you to choose which server database you want to restore. If you want to use the Operations Center to set this up, you will use the Operations Center command builder to issue the define connection, the validate cloud connection, the define dev class, and the set DB recovery portion of the setup. And then from the OC, you can use it to kick off on-demand database backups. You can do a quick lookup of server details, as well as you can view the cloud devices out there. I do have a couple YouTubes out there showing both the Azure cloud, the S3 cloud, database backups, as well as utilizing the Operations Center to do the Spectrum Protect database backup. So if you went in the Operations Center under Storage and then Disk or Cloud Devices, if you clicked on Cloud, you would actually see the device classes associated with the different clouds. If you went into Server Details Properties, you'll see the different properties for that Spectrum Protect server, including the database backup and recovery properties, which you could edit if you wanted to. And if you went into Operations Center, Servers, Quick Look, you could see, for instance, the database backup and recovery overviews of like the device type and so forth. This slide covers the newly supported operating systems and file systems. I always suggest you go out and check the website to make sure what you're looking at is most current. Some of the highlights here is Spectrum Protect for VE now supports vSphere 7.0. Okay, HSM for Windows. Back in version 8.1.9, we did introduce the ability for the HSM for Windows REST API to work with the Grafana. In version 8.1.10, we're taking this HSM data that's been formatted for the Prometheus time series database, and we're adding additional metrics. So here you can see in version 8.1.10, we've added all these new metrics. And the next couple slides actually give you the details on what we had in version 8.1.9 versus the new metrics we've added in version 8.1.10. And I do have a YouTube out there on the 8.1.9 setup, so take a look at that. Also in HSM for Windows, we've added the ability to create corporate networking certificates, and these are going to be OpenSSL commands that are available. And we do have documentation on how to do that in the networking readme.html. Also, network services HSM net can now be manually started and stopped. And we do have a pre-configured Grafana dashboard template available. So that's out underneath your installation directory, underneath networking, and then it's called HSM-Grafana-dashboard-JSON. And you can simply import that template file into Grafana. In Spectrum Protect for Space Management, which is our Unix-based HSM, we now have the ability to block HSM transparent recalls. So what does this mean? So in large-scale environments where customers have migrated a lot of data out to Spectrum Protect and left in place these little stub files, if a user on these large environments started to access a lot of these stub files in an uncontrolled manner, that could lead to a lot of tape mounts on the Spectrum Protect side, and that would result in really poor performance. We do have an existing option called Optimized Tape Recall, which allows that data for that recall to be brought back in the best order, and usually that's based upon where it's sitting on a tape. But now we can take this a step further by adding in this HSM optimized recall equals yes, and this will block any unsorted recalls. And so the benefits of this is that the tapes are going to be mounted only once per optimized recall, and thus your overall recall time is going to decrease. And instead of the recalls being done willy-nilly, they will be done via list. But this does require your end users to understand how recalls are happening, and they need to be informed that transparent recalls are no longer going to work, and that organization needs to establish a way to have the recall request from the users being lined up so that they can then be recalled as this group. In order to turn on this HMS optimized DR recall only, this option is going to be placed at the top of your dsm.sys file. No is the default, which allows all recalls of the files to happen as they come in. If you turn it to the new option of yes, then we will fail all transparent and selective recalls, and that will fail with an error no e-access error. Let's go ahead and switch over to Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.6. I'm going to talk about the enhanced Kubernetes support, and then I'll turn over the rest of the new features to my colleague Sean to talk about. In version 10.1.5 of Spectrum Protect Plus, we introduced the ability to protect persistent volumes inside of a Kubernetes environment. And we can take a snapshot, which is stored locally, of these persistent volumes, and then on a scheduled basis, we can copy those snapshots out to Spectrum Protect Plus's vSnap server. And this was done via the kubectl inside of Kubernetes. In version 10.1.6, we're expanding our protection to be not only PVCs, but namespaces or labels that will span a cluster. And now you can set this up either via kubectl or via the Spectrum Protect Plus user interface. So now inside of Spectrum Protect Plus user interface or inside of the Kubernetes command line, you can create and assign service level agreements to do in-container snapshots inside of Kubernetes, to copy those snapshots off to Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap, to replicate those vSnap copies to another Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap, or to offload those vSnap copies to a Spectrum Protect tape or cloud environment. And when we do these backups and restores of the persistent volumes, those can either be individual PVCs, they can be all the PVCs in a namespace, or they can be all the PVC cluster-wide that have a specific label. We also have a Spectrum Protect Plus user interface report that I'll show you as well. I do have 2 videos out there showing the installation of Spectrum Protect Plus into the Kubernetes environment and how to set up backup, restore, and reporting in both the user interface as well as in Kubernetes. So the first thing you have to do is download and install from IBM the Spectrum Protect Plus Kubernetes portion of the code. So once you download that from IBM and untar it, you're going to go out and customize the bas_config.cfg file inside of Kubernetes and point it, for instance, to the Spectrum Protect Plus server, give it some server admin IDs, specify the cluster you want to back up, and so forth. You're then going to run this bas_install-sh against that bas config file, and that will automatically register that cluster and host IP inside of Spectrum Protect Plus. In fact, if you go and look inside of Spectrum Protect Plus, you can see the cluster, or if you drill down, the host address. So normally that's all you have to do. However, if something happened and that cluster accidentally got deleted from inside of Spectrum Protect Plus, you can go and click on this Add Cluster piece, and that will manually walk you through re-adding it in. You still have to have set up this bas_config file and have run the bas install against that cluster. All this is going to be doing is recapturing the information about the user IDs and port numbers and so forth that were created when this script ran, and then reinserting them into the Spectrum Protect Plus. Out of the box, we have a SLA that is just for container backups, and you can utilize that, or you can create a customized SLA inside of Spectrum Protect Plus to protect these PVCs. And you have a couple options. The first part here is going to create the snapshots which are stored locally inside of Kubernetes. You can then optionally add in a backup policy which will send copies of those to the vSnap. And you can optionally add in Spectrum Protect Plus replication and copy or archive to Spectrum Protect or object storage. When you associate portions of Kubernetes to an SLA, you can either associate individual PVCs, you can associate all the PVCs underneath the namespace, or all the PVCs that have the same label across a cluster. So we can view these by clicking on the view, and that'll give you either a namespace view or a label view of the clusters that are out there. And of course, then you can drill down inside of those and see the individual namespaces and PVCs inside of that cluster. So the SLAs are assigned based either on the PVC, namespace, or label. And of course, you can assign multiple SLAs to individual PVCs or namespaces. If you wanted to kick off an on-demand backup and not wait for a scheduled backup to occur, there's 2 ways to do that inside of Spectrum Protect Plus. The first way is an on-demand from the cluster. So here you have your cluster, Sirius 01, and if I click on Create Job, I can kick off an ad hoc backup. And this will allow you to pick which SLA you want to use to protect that cluster. It will only be a snapshot backup, meaning it's only going to occur inside of the Kubernetes environment. If you do an on-demand from an SLA level, going into the SLA and then choosing Actions and clicking Start, this will back up all of the entities that are in that SLA. And then you will be given the option of doing either a backup to vSnap, a snapshot, which is your Kubernetes only, or replicate to a separate vSnap. You'll be given the options to choose which of these you want to do. When you choose to do a restore, you'll be given the option of restoring from either the vSnap copy, which is inside of Spectrum Protect Plus, or the copies residing locally inside of Kubernetes, which is our snapshot copies. You can choose to have an on-demand restore, or you can set up a recurring restore if, for instance, you're using this in a test environment where each day you want to restore the latest version out there. And then, of course, you get to choose which backup you want to restore from, and you can either restore to the original location or a new location. If you want to run a report on your backup history, you can go into the Spectrum Protect Plus user interface, into reports, and you can either choose an on-demand or a custom report. Now, all of this can also be done from inside of Kubernetes. It requires a Kubernetes admin to create YAML files to do these backups. And we have a couple different backup types. We have our normal backup, which we introduced in the last release, which is PVC based. And of course, we have an on-demand backup, which will create a snapshot immediately instead of being a scheduled backup. The new pieces we've introduced are this backup label, which will back up based upon labels, or backup namespace, which backs up based upon the namespace. And then, of course, we have the request type of restore, which was in our previous release also. Okay, so what I just explained was our new capabilities to protect Kubernetes, either on a individual PVC, on a namespace, or based upon labels which span across the cluster. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sean.
So continuing with new features for Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.6, the next feature I'm going to talk about is the ability to back up Windows file systems. As you know, Spectrum Protect Plus has had the ability to back up virtual machines since the beginning, since the first version. But in 10.1.6, we are adding the ability to back up physical machines or virtual machines at the file system level. And we are going to begin with Microsoft Windows. So for Microsoft Windows, we're going to have the ability to protect file systems, directories, and files on both physical and virtual Windows server systems. Basically, you're going to go in and specify the file system servers and drives that contain the data that you want to protect. Spectrum Protect Plus will automatically go out there and inventory those systems and provide you a list of the file systems. And then you'll be able to do an incremental forever backup of the files and directories that live on those Windows systems. From a restore perspective, you're going to be able to use a file system restore UI to browse the file systems through a browser and to be able to pick the files that you want to restore. Now here you see a link to a YouTube video. As we go through this, I'm going to go through some details, but if you'd like to see a recording or a demo of this in action, I will point you to the video that is on the screen. So just starting out with some background, some supported systems. We are going to support Windows 2012 R2, 2016, and 2019. And we are going to support Windows Resilient File System and NTFS to begin. So note that file allocation table drives are not on that list, or FAT drives are not on that list. From a browser perspective, in order to use the file system restore UI, you're going to have to use Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. From a connectivity perspective, the file system restore UI is going to need to connect to the Windows system that you are doing a restore on in order to be able to restore files there. So from a firewall perspective, you will have to have the firewall open from both the Spectrum Protect Plus server to the Windows systems that you're doing a restore on. And from a backup perspective, you're also going to have your firewalls and ports open between the Windows system and the Spectrum Protect Plus server. As usual, IP connectivity and DNS connectivity is critical. So I highly recommend you don't use IP addressing, use DNS when you're setting this up or testing it. Now, from an authentication and privileges perspective, in version 10.1.6, we are going to require that you use the local administrator to define the Windows system. So for the moment, at version 10.1.6, we're not going to allow domain user or users that have local administrative privileges by virtue of their group inclusion. You're going to have to use the local administrator. Again, as with all of the applications and environments that Spectrum Protect Plus supports, if you're looking for details of ports and firewall setups and authentication and privileges and supported operating systems, go out and Google the All Requirements document for Spectrum Protect Plus, and you will see the details for every version. And I do that just to make sure that I know the details and can look through them on a systematic basis. From a backup architecture, the way this is going to work is basically the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus server, when doing the backup, is going to mount using a CIFS share the drives to the vSnap server. This is going to be done using this file system protection agent. And so once that mounting happens, the system is going to, or the file system protection agent is going to back up the metadata for the files that are being backed up to a metadata database that is stored on the vSnap server. So that metadata database is what is allowing us to do the incremental forever backup. It's recording what's already been backed up and what will be backed up so that we can do an incremental forever methodology on this file system, or the file systems on the Windows server. The data for the backup and the data for the files is also going to be stored on the vSnap server, and that is going to happen via a CIFS share. Now when it comes time to do a restore, the Spectrum Protect Plus Restore UI is going to be run on the same system that is running the Spectrum Protect Plus user interface. So this may be a workstation. And that system is going to connect into the Windows server that you're going to restore. Well, first, Spectrum Protect Plus is going to mount up the vSnap disk that you have the backup data stored on, and then bring up this restore UI and allow you to pick and choose the files that you want to restore to the Windows server. When you're through, that disk will be dismounted. This is some further information about doing the registration inventory and applying the SLAs to Windows file systems. And what you're going to see is this works very similar to all of the other hypervisors and applications in Spectrum Protect Plus. What's going to happen is you're going to go out and register a Windows server using an administrative user. Spectrum Protect Plus is then going to immediately go out there and run an inventory on that system or systems, and you will be able to, as you see down here in the bottom of the screen, browse through the servers and the drives located on those systems. You will then be able to go in and apply a service level agreement, which looks just like any other service level agreement in Spectrum Protect Plus, to those file systems or to those Windows systems. That service level agreement contains the schedule on which to run the backups, the destination for the backups in terms of a site, and a retention period for the backup data. Windows file system backups work like any other Spectrum Protect Plus data. You can also do replication on them, or you can do copy archive to either object storage or Spectrum Protect disk or tape. So continuing with Windows file system backup for Spectrum Protect Plus, we do allow you to exclude a specific set of files or directories, and this is done on the Windows system or the drive that you are attempting to back up. Here at the bottom of the screen you see the exclude list. It's one per line, and you can go in and exclude a specific set of directories or a specific set of files from backup. By default, the following set of folders are excluded, and here you see the list here. And there's also this files not to backup registry key that specifies the names of files and directories that the backup application, Spectrum Protect Plus, should not backup or restore. I've included a syntax reference here for you. I'm not going to read it to you, but as you can see, you can pretty much do almost anything with regard to directories, file systems, cases, and or files in terms of exclude. I just will point out that this is exclude only. Unlike Spectrum Protect, it does not include statements. So by default, everything is going to be included unless it is excluded. Now from a restore, what we're going to do is use a very similar graphical user interface that we use in the Spectrum Protect BA client web GUI to do the restores. And here you see a picture of what the restore UI looks like. In terms of the workflow, what's going to happen is you are going to create a restore task with one file system per task using the snapshot restore wizard. Then Spectrum Protect Plus is going to go ahead and map that volume to the Windows systems to which you're trying to do the restore. This is basically a web-based application, and then as a user you're going to go in and open up this web GUI, and then you'll just go in and, as you can see down here, pick the files that you want to restore, move them over here to the restore list, and then click on the restore option. And then Spectrum Protect Plus is going to move those files from that mapped volume to the system to which you're trying to restore. Now, from a overwrite perspective, I just want to let you know some details here. There is no overwrite, so you do have the option here to either restore to a separate directory and rename the files, or if a file is restored to a same or alternate location where the name exists, what we're going to do is change the name of the restored file to reflect the backup date. So basically we will not do an overwrite from this interface. You'll do one or more of these, and then when you're finished, you're going to go in and you will have an active resource in Spectrum Protect Plus. and you'll be able to mark that restore job as completed, and Spectrum Protect will unmount that drive from the Windows systems to which you are restoring. Now there are some limitations at version 10.1.6. This is the first version of Windows File System Backup and Restore that we're releasing, and I wanted to point out some of those to you. First, I mentioned this already, that you have to use a local administrator ID to register the system. The second limitation is that in this restore GUI, there is not a search function. So basically you'll have to drill down and find the files or file or directories that you want to restore and restore them. You can't go in and search. And there are a few use cases that are not supported, or a few types of systems. First of all, system shares, CSVs or clustered shared volumes or Microsoft custom volumes, or nested volumes with no drive letter assigned. FAT file systems, as I mentioned earlier, we support NTFS and REFS. If you're using Spectrum Protect Hierarchical Storage Manager for Windows and you have stub files, we do not support backing them up. And then finally, if you're using any of the other Spectrum Protect features, like for Exchange or SQL Server, we do not support in this first release protecting the files on systems that have those other agents or application workloads installed. So you're going to have to not use Windows File System Restore on those servers in this current version. I also want to mention how locked and or changed files are dealt with in the Windows File System backup. Basically, we are not doing a VSS snapshot of these Windows file systems. So what's going to happen is if a file is locked or changes during the backup, we are going to retry the file. And if it becomes available, obviously we'll back it up. Or if it doesn't become available after the default number of retries, we will essentially mark that file as failed and not back it up on this particular backup. Okay, moving on to the next feature of Spectrum Protect Plus, and this is kind of a cross feature between Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus. We have been saying for quite a while now that the products, Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus, are merging. And we have a lot of requests from our customers to be able to monitor both products from one graphical user interface. So beginning in version 8.1.10, you will be able to, in the Spectrum Protect Operations Center, pull up a graphical user interface, essentially a monitoring session on Spectrum Protect Plus. Here you can see, you go to Overview, Protect Plus, and you will see what is the equivalent of the Spectrum Protect Plus dashboard. So you'll be able to see high-level things like capacity, disk storage, job history, and jobs and operations. You can also click on these jobs and see the details of the logs if you choose to do that. Now this is going to support Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.5 and 10.1.6. So you can monitor a one-level back Spectrum Protect Plus. And if you'd like to see a demo of this, here's a link to the YouTube. So adding a Spectrum Protect Plus server to or environment to the Spectrum Protect OC is really very straightforward. What you're going to do is go to Overview, Protect Plus in the Spectrum Protect Operations Center, and you'll see initially you'll have no servers that are configured. And then what's going to happen is you're just going to give it the Protect Plus server address and port, and you'll be initially required to accept the certificate. At that point, then you're going to just choose how you're going to authenticate to Spectrum Protect Plus. And there are two options. One is to just use a common Active Directory LDAP credential that is used on both the Spectrum Protect server and the Spectrum Protect Plus server. Or if you choose to, you can use the second option here, which will create a monitoring administrator on the Spectrum Protect Plus server. So what that's going to do is just create an administrator on the Spectrum Protect Plus server, and it will be a monitoring only role with read-only privileges. Finally, of course, you'll have to enter an admin ID or password who has the authority to create this new role on Protect Plus. And then once you do that, the monitoring will be set up and you'll be able to monitor Spectrum Protect Plus from the Operations Center. You can monitor more than one Spectrum Protect Plus server from the Spectrum Protect Operations Center. The way you do that is if you go up here to the monitoring, to the Spectrum Protect Plus monitoring pane, you can either pick a particular server that you've already added or add a different server. And each Spectrum Protect Plus server is going to have its own overview page, and you can toggle between the environments. Now, as a rule, we don't expect there to be many Spectrum Protect Plus servers in an environment. For the most part, most Spectrum Protect Plus implementations are going to have one server at this time. But if you do need to add multiple servers, you can do that. Okay, so moving on to AWS EC2 support. Beginning in 10.1.6, Spectrum Protect Plus will now add a new hypervisor provider, which is going to be Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, or Amazon EC2 as it's known. Now, the design of this is going to be very similar to VMware and Hyper-V, where you go in and register your AWS instances using an access key pair. You then do an inventory of those instances, apply SLAs to the instances to control when snapshots are taken and to set the schedule, and that is how the protection is done. Now, there is one slight difference from the way we're doing Hyper-V and VMware. For Hyper-V and VMware, the snapshots are stored on vSnap. And for AWS, with their EC2 snapshots, they are going to remain on AWS S3 storage and are not going to be copied to vSnap. So let's look at some details of that. In the upper right hand corner, you see a YouTube where you can see a demo of this if you'd like to do that after you review the presentation. The first step is going to be to make sure that the user has access, the proper access credentials into AWS. You can of course use administrator or Amazon EC2 full access, but you can also set up the detailed permissions that are defined over there on the left. Now, I won't read those to you. The best thing to do for things like this is to Google Spectrum Protect Plus All Requirements document, and in there we'll have a specific set of permissions that you need to set up in order to set up the credentials, and so use that. Once a user is created in AWS with an access key and secret key, we're now able to register the EC2 provider into Spectrum Protect Plus. You're going to click on Amazon EC2 under Virtualized Systems, and you can see here on the left that that is where it's found. And then you're going to do a add account. And when you do add an account, you're just going to give the account a name, and you're going to give it an access key and a secret key. Once you save the account, it's going to automatically add the provider and run an inventory for all regions to which that account has access. So those will show up in Spectrum Protect Plus once the inventory is run. If you have multiple accounts associated with EC2, you can add those, and those instances will also show up in Spectrum Protect Plus for you to apply SLAs and run data protection jobs against. Each region in AWS is going to be treated as a hypervisor in Spectrum Protect Plus, with the account being the parent object tying them together. So as you can see here in this screenshot, we have the accounts at the top level, and then the regions available to drill down. When the inventory runs, it's going to query the EBS volume and EC2 information from AWS and save it in the Spectrum Protect catalog, and that is going to be updated every time the inventory jobs run. And once you do that, the instances will be visible on the screen under Manage Protection by drilling down in this screen here. You're going to then need to create an SLA policy for AWS EC2. And this is really just like any other policy, except there is one difference. You'll notice here that the other hypervisors and applications are all grouped together, but EC2 is separate. And the reason behind that is because since you're not copying the snapshot to vSnap, that information, the site information in the SLA, is not needed. So you're just going to enter all of the other information in the SLA that you need. And you can also provide this snapshot prefix just to allow you to identify the snapshot. Once you do that, instances or tags can be assigned to the SLA policies, and you do that just like you do anything else in Spectrum Protect. Basically, you just go in and select the proper policy and apply it. Just check off the resources you wish to assign to the SLA, and then save the setting. You can run the data protection operation manually below, or you can also have them run them through the Create Job Run button, or you can just have them run during the schedule that you assign to the SLA. Restoring, like all the other restores in Spectrum Protect Plus, goes through the Snapshot Restore wizard. If you're familiar with VMware and Hyper-V and all the applications, this is going to look very familiar to you, because this is the exact same way that we do those. You click on the Create Job button, and you're just going to select Amazon EC2. And you're going to see the snapshots that you created, and just select the one that you want to restore. For the destinations, we're going to have the option of restoring only to the original availability zone, or to an alternate availability zone within the same region. If restoring to an alternate availability zone, you can specify subnet for the instance being restored. All the EC2 restores are going to run in clone mode, which is going to create a copy of the instance from the EBS snapshot. And it's going to register a custom AMI from the snapshot and instance metadata and inventory, running an instance from that AMI, and then cleaning up the AMI after the instance is created. We also support, in addition to restoring the entire instance, we support instance access for individual disks. And the way you do that is you drill down past the instance level to select the individual disks that you want to restore. In this restore scenario, the disk can either be restored to an original instance or you can attach it to an alternate instance. And then the way you would do that is to select this alternate availability zone option when you create the job. You can also optionally provide a device name, or it will pick one for you if you do not provide the device name. Just pick the next one for you. Okay, so we've covered the three really big enhancements for Spectrum Protect Plus. The Kubernetes enhancements and changes to the way Kubernetes works, support for Amazon, AWS EC2, and Windows file system support. And now we're going to move on to just a lot of little miscellaneous changes which are small in some ways, but very big from a usability perspective, and hopefully making people's jobs easier and making running the software easier. The first of which is this backup progress report. Beginning in version 10.1.6, we now have a backup progress indicator. So when you click on the Running Jobs tab and select a job, you'll now see this progress selection. And when you click on that, as you can see down here, you will see the progress of each machine when a backup is running. So that's a very useful thing if you have a large machine or a long-running machine. You can kind of get an idea of how far through you are of the backup. And again, for all of these slides, if there's a link down here, you'll see the YouTube demo of that particular feature. Another usability in 10.1.6 is support for multiple NICs in vSnap. Way back in 10.1.3, we added the ability to throttle replication at the site level for vSnaps. And beginning in version 10.1.6, we can now customize the network interfaces on vSnap. And basically what this is going to let you do is control which workload goes over which NIC. So for instance, if you want your backup and restore to go over one NIC, you can have that happen, and your replication to go over another network interface card, you can have that happen. So that's beginning in version 10.1.6, and again, you can see a demo of that. From a documentation update, we've made a huge effort to look through the documentation and try and improve the areas that we've been seeing a lot of questions on and that needed a lot of explanation. We have a new and improved REST API guide for Spectrum Protect Plus. We separated out the vSnap information into a new vSnap user guide, which has all the information you need to manage vSnap in one place. We have a new section in the guide for copying and archiving from Spectrum Protect Plus, explaining how that works. We have a new deployment storyboard, which allows you to get started quickly. we've gone in and looked at all the message files, and we've edited them, reworked them to make sure that they have the best explanations possible. We've added some graphics to the Knowledge Center, and we've also added some disaster recovery topics. So these are just some things that we've added to the documentation, and if you go out to the Knowledge Center and take a look, I think you'll find that that is a large improvement over the previous version. This is just one of the examples of the documentation. We have a new REST API reference, and we've included general information about API design, an introduction to developing software that interacts with Spectrum Protect Plus, and we've included several different reference chapters that include typical tasks, general information about every task, examples and screenshots, and some sample scripts. If you go in the product and click on API reference, you will get to that documentation. So it's available in the product, and it's also available as a PDF from the documentation. And again, there's a YouTube that shows you a demo of how that's used. SQL Server. Over the last several versions, we've added some features for SQL Server, and we continue to do that. We've added a new support for standby mode for restore. So after the restore, it leaves the database in read-only mode, where the uncommitted transaction saved in an undo file. We've also improved the parallelism for ad hoc SQL database backups, which allows multiple sessions from the same SLA to run without collision. So if you're doing ad hoc SQL backups, it should be much more efficient from a parallelism perspective. The report screen in Spectrum Protect Plus, we've added new reports to support the file system backup, of course. And we've also gone back and taken a look at the reports from Spectrum Protect and tried to flatten them out and reduce the need for scroll bars where possible. And we've updated the look and feel, and also allowed for sorting by category, and so that they appear in alphabetical order. We've added several new global options for Spectrum Protect Plus that allows you to control various parts of the product. The first one is a VADP proxy, a hot add transport, and this allows you to specify a hot add transport at a higher level instead of having to do one on each VADP proxy. We've added a data store free space check that allows you to ensure that there's enough space available in a data store before you start storing snapshots to it. We've changed the way VM grouping is done for VMware, and of course that's configurable. And we've also added a job log retention setting, which allows you to control the number of days that the job logs are kept in Spectrum Protect Plus. We've gone through, and just like Spectrum Protect, we have now allowed additional vendors to validate their S3 storage for copy and archive. I put the reference up there, and today that includes Ceph Object Storage, Dell EMC, RStore, and OpenIO. I would encourage you to just, if you have some compatible object storage, just go to that list or Google it and see if it's supported. And we'd also done some work with application support to make sure we're current on all the applications that are supported by Spectrum Protect Plus. So that includes Red Hat 8, Red Hat 7.8 as VM guests, Microsoft SQL 2019 as a SQL application, and for VMware vSphere 7.0, which was released in April. Okay, so finally I'd like to go over the Spectrum Copy Data Management enhancements for version 2.2.11. For those of you who are familiar with Spectrum Copy Data Management, it is our hardware snapshot application, so it allows you to do data protection and data reuse using hardware snapshots. Beginning in version 2.2.11, we are now going to support log backup for SAP HANA. And of course, since we're doing log backup, you'll now be able to do a point-in-time recovery for SAP HANA. As you can see from the screenshots on the slide, you can configure a directory for each HANA instance from the backup job. There are details on the prerequisites for the directories and the details of the requirements in the Spectrum Copy Data Management User Guide. You can select a directory for each individual instance or a common directory for all the instances selected as part of the backup job. And the HANA system will use this directory to copy the log segments. Then the log segments are going to be backed up as part of the Spectrum Copy Data Management snapshot. And by default, the contents of the directory will be purged every 7 days. Now that you have the log backups, you can do a point-in-time restore. And the workflow is very similar to all of the other restores in Spectrum Copy Data Management. You select the source for the copy, and you select Allow Point-in-Time Selection when job runs, and select the destination for configuring the restore job. When the job is started, the user is then going to be presented with an option to specify the point in time. And then when you're presented with that option, you are going to specify a time frame for which the Spectrum Copy Data Management backups have run. If you specify a time frame later than the latest backup, then you have to do a non-point in time restore, and the user would be able to use the log backup volume that you specified a little earlier. When the restore job is run, the required data and log backup snapshot are mounted to the HANA machine. And then once the restore job is run, the admin can use the HANA clients like HANA Studio to continue with the point-in-time recovery of the system and tenant database. Just a few other miscellaneous enhancements for ACFS. We now support Oracle databases that use ACFS. We also support Oracle configurations that use symbolic links for the Oracle directory. And then finally, for currency, we have added support for Oracle 18c and 19c databases running in both standalone and an Oracle RAC configuration. So that completes this update. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.